is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Lynda Kinkade. We have breaking news. A victory against ISIS has been declared in the Iraqi city of Mosul. The Iraqi Prime Minister arrived in the northern city to make the announcement that Mosul has been liberated from ISIS. Now, according to his office, Haider al-Abadi congratulated the soldiers and the Iraqi people, calling this a great victory. It comes nearly 3 years after the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, declared the ISIS caliphate. Well, our CNN's Nick Paton Walsh was in Mosul recently, reporting for us there. He joins us now from the nearby city of Erbil. Nick, this was the exact city where ISIS declared its caliphate. What does this declaration of victory mean? How significant is it?
There is an element of politics to this in that it is symbolic. It is about Iraq saying this chapter in its history is closed, because there will still be a low-level insurgency of the remnants of ISIS for years ahead. But what's key today is Iraq is trying to turn the page. Haider al-Abadi, you're probably seeing live pictures of him now. He has arrived at a police base slightly to the north of Mosul's airport, on a good day perhaps 10-15 minutes drive from the Al-Nuri mosque, where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, declared their self-declared caliphate pretty much exactly 3 years 10 days ago from where we're speaking. Now he's arriving there. We're expecting him to make some sort of address live on Iraqi television, and after many similar statements in the past, this time finally say Mosul is liberated, and really that does pretty much declare an end of the caliphate of ISIS so far in Iraq. There are other towns in which they have a strong presence where the fighting will continue, but it's this population centre that has been so vital, that the fighting for which has been 8 months of intense, brutal, bloody battles, many civilians caught in the crossfire, and potentially today we're hearing that security forces have reached the Tigris River that runs through the middle of the city, pretty much cutting ISIS off now and taking their territory. Lynda?
Nick, you mentioned this battle of Mosul has dragged on for more than 9 months. Any indication of how many civilians are left in the city right now?
None. The numbers have been guesswork, to be honest. We've run from anything from 150,000 to perhaps less. There were suggestions maybe 20,000 were trapped in the remaining pocket of the old city, that dense warren of alleyways, which the most intense, brutal final chapter of fighting has occurred. People used as human shields, coming out of the rubble of buildings that have been flattened by airstrikes or simply car bombs, the endless booby traps ISIS have put down. At this stage today, we understand the fighting is possibly still going on, but the key thing is that the Iraqi special forces have reached the river, which is the back end of ISIS territory inside of Iraq, basically inside of the old city of Mosul. The fighting is still going on. We understand that the remnants of ISIS are possibly thought to be foreign fighters, most of them wearing suicide vests. So imagine the ferocity of fighting there when you're facing an enemy, frankly, who are eager to die. But still, we should not detract from this, which is a momentous moment for Iraq, in which they say the caliphate here, as it was so called, so declared by ISIS, is pretty much over. And that comes with the most popular city of Mosul, which ISIS ever controlled, now, in the words of their prime minister, being, quote, liberated from that group. The work is still brutal ahead. We don't know the numbers of those who've died, of civilians in the fighting, of Iraqi forces in the fighting. It's been hard to get transparency about how this conflict has played out because of the chaotic nature of it, and that sadly spells potentially bad news in the months ahead, because the lack of those numbers, the lack of a broader discussion, leaves, I think, many people in this country unsure of the sacrifice made, unsure of how the government will deal transparently with the more potentially torturous and lengthier issues ahead of healing society here. Remember, Lynda, this isn't simply a terrorist group turning up here, depositing themselves from the sky. They were part of a disenfranchised movement amongst the Iraqi population here, extremists among the Sunni ethnic group. They ran the country as a minority under Saddam Hussein, but the tables have turned, and now it's the Shia ethnic group of the country that find themselves controlling much of the government and the military. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has done what he can to try and bridge that sectarianism, but it was really the fount from which ISIS originally sprouted, and which previous incarnations of extremism have come in the past. And the fear, I think, now is that unless that political healing moves faster pace forwards, then we'll see reconstruction slow, and then potentially those disenfranchised disenfranchised Iraqis who themselves felt distant from government and potentially gave succor to ISIS may yet again feel remote and distant from the government. But it's still today, there is a moment perhaps of celebration, of pause, to consider the sacrifice that Iraqis frankly have made for the world, really, because ISIS became so quickly a global problem despite to some degree their local roots. But still today, Haider al-Abadi taking what will be a podium quite soon to make an announcement, frankly, which many across the world, in the White House, in capitals across Europe that have suffered from the ISIS-inspired terrorism that has sprouted from this group, will be waiting to hear, because it marks, certainly in Iraq, the end of a very gruesome chapter. Lynda?
Nick, speaking of that sectarian divide, ISIS is a Sunni terror group. We know that Mosul was a majority Sunni city liberated by a government of Shiite Muslims. How hard will it be for them to determine who are ISIS sympathizers?
Well, very hard, but also to some degree, I think their suspicion envelope is quite low. They do tend to regard most of the men who emerge from the areas in which they are fighting against ISIS as potentially suspects for being part of ISIS. We've seen them dealt with and heard reports of them being dealt with brutally and at times quite swiftly. And I think that all plays into the challenge now for Iraqi society of healing that rift. It's, I would say, probably, given these societies have often been on opposing sides of a very brutal front line, a very arduous task and not an impossible one in the immediate short term, but it is that which the global community has to help Iraq with funds to perhaps make it beyond easy for reconstruction to occur in those damaged areas, Lynda.
All right, Nick Paton Walsh for us live in Erbil, Iraq. Thank you very much for staying across this story. And just for our viewers, just to recap, a victory against ISIS has been declared in the Iraqi city of Mosul. We're going to have more on this story just ahead. I'm Lynda Kinkade. For now, we return you to the State of the Union in progress.